Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good day, depending on where you're located right now. My name is Lalita Raman, and I'm the panel moderator for the topic being the art of change leadership, leading and inspiring change at the intersection of people, culture, and strategy. So let me introduce myself first so that you know who is the moderator. I'm based in Hong Kong, so yeah, it's midnight here. What I do, I help leaders, change agents, teams, groups diagnose and transform the dysfunction that they see in their organizations. Developing individual and group clarity about roles is one aspect of that. So, role analysis and role clarity with transitions is what I do through coaching, facilitation, and other forms of change that I can help organizations with. Let us bring our panelists to the stage, and Jessa will help us do that. We have 5 panelists, and they will introduce themselves when they come online. Jessa, could we have the panelists, please? Welcome, everyone. So we have the panelists, and I'm going to call out the names so that I'm going to call out the names so that each of you can introduce yourself. April, we have April Moore. So April, why don't you introduce yourself, where you're calling from, and what you do? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much. So I'm April Moore. I'm a senior organizational development professional, so sort of been in that line of work for the last 15 to 20 years. And I currently work as a director of organizational effectiveness, learning, and development at BNS Health, which is a nonprofit home healthcare organization in New York.
Sorry, I was on mute. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Kruger. I am located in the United States, and I'm the lead of Unisys's Change Management Office, where we specialize in driving user adoption of the products and services that Unisys delivers. And happy to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Nikki Da Silva.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Nikki Da Silva calling in from Toronto, Canada. I'm currently the Chief People Officer at Golf Canada, which is the national sports federation for golf in our country. Only joined in February. Prior to that, have 20 years of experience. The first 15 not in HR, in general management at a university level, higher ed, and then 5 in international development, where I was a Chief People Officer for 5 years. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. Trent Cotton.
Hey there, Trent Cotton. I am the Vice President of Talent and Culture for Hatchworks Technologies and author of 2 books, Sprint Recruiting and The Futurist, and or the Future HRist is kind of a play on words. And I am a catalyst. So did not grow up in HR, actually started on the business side and decided that I hated HR so much I was going to go in and change it. And 20 years later, I'm still trying.
Thank you. And last but definitely not the least, Alexandra Prasis.
Hi, Alex Prasis. So my background is culture and change leadership, currently on the consulting side, but held internal positions as well. And in particular, I build or transform people functions. So we've got some commonality within this group. I'm also pursuing a PhD in organizational leadership with a research focus on building organizational trust, and I teach in a master's IO psychology program.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here. And yeah, so we are living in a time, in a world where technology, globalization, evolving business models, hybrid work, and these are just some of the variables impacting the competitive landscapes across virtually all industries, and therefore challenging leaders in their leadership position. So the first question I have, pretty simple and straightforward, the answer may not be that straightforward, is how can leaders be effective in times of change? And any of you can start. And we can continue thereon. I'm not going to call out names, so any of you can start.
Being the only guy on here, I'm going to let one of the ladies go first.
Well, I'll take a shot at going first, which is always fun because I know lots of people will add to what I throw out there. But to me, I think the most important thing to be an effective leader in times of change is your mindset. I don't think that there's any more time of not change, if that makes any sense. There's no such thing, and there's leading in an agile and transparent way while also just adjusting your actions in alignment to tactical and strategic directions that are always changing. So it's about your mindset and letting go of this idea that there's not going to be any change. That's the world we live in. So that's my 2 cents.
Very good point about mindset. Alex, please. Yes.
So sorry. Thank you. To build on that, I would say understanding the change. So obviously, if it's an external force, really kind of wrapping your head around what it means for the business. And then an internal change, of course, like really understanding where the other leaders are coming from. Maybe you're part of designing the change, right? But making sure that you all have a common goal, because if you don't understand the change, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to communicate the change to others.
And actually building on that, because one of the themes I was thinking of was actually communication. And I think it's continuous, open, two-way communication during any times of change or any change you might be leading or helping people through. Never underestimate how much people can put their own sort of like viewpoints and perspectives in times of silence. So even when you don't have anything to communicate, communicating where you are and what you don't know, what hasn't been decided yet, it's a big part of keeping people engaged and in a narrative that's more around reality versus what it is that we might be picking up in our heads around things when we feel like there's a communication vacuum. And then also the ability, like two-way communication, the continuous check-in on where people are with regards to different changes that are happening or transitions, so that you're able to actually pinpoint how you might need to customize your support for everybody that you're sort of leading and supporting.
Well said. Well, I can jump in here if okay with you, Lolita. I think
Absolutely.
I'm hearing the importance of that clarity of leadership, communication, and vision, and repeating that over and over as leaders. How do you ensure that everyone knows what direction they're heading, why? And probably my addition is communicating and showing up with empathy through times of change is really about the how, to ensure that not only people understand the business imperative and the direction that we're heading, but also that it can be hard, and showing them that you understand, even if it isn't hard for you personally. Displaying that empathy can really help keep moving towards that direction. Sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 back, sometimes 3 forward, 4 back, but eventually you'll get there.
And one of my favorite questions to ask, like before leading a change, kind of getting all the people in the same room, is which one do you like more, going to a movie or going to a meeting? And of course, everyone, leans toward going to a movie. And I like to point out that there's 2 things that keep us sitting for 3 hours to watch Braveheart or Endgame, the Avengers Endgame. There's 2 things that keep us in the seat and engaged. One is the conflict, and the other is storytelling. And so I think it's very important that as you're leading this kind of change, that you, one, are prepared for, embrace, and actually induce conflict, healthy conflict, to make sure that your project stays online. But then making sure that you're constantly telling the story, showing them, hey, this is where we're going. This is why the battle we're fighting today is going to get us to this level, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, or even 2 years from now. Both are equally important.
So I'm hearing, obviously the mindset is important, communication with empathy, also conflict, healthy conflict, which will enable conversations, dialogues, get in different perspectives, as well as storytelling. Now, change creates obviously a lot of uncertainty, most of the changes. And therefore, with uncertainty, we are, our brain perceives us as a threat. And a lot of neuroscientists will tell you that. And one thing which has been, again, researched and analyzed is, with uncertainty, you give a little bit of clarity. And storytelling provides that clarity, hopefully, if you're transparent enough. So my question is on mindset. How do you manage your mindset when you see the future impact of that change? You kind of know it, you kind of more or less see it, but you have to live in the now.
I can take this one because I can tell you exactly what not to do. So this is something that I struggle with, because I get so obsessed with where we're going, and I'm so excited. I've been accused by teams, I'll kind of get through this whole thing, and we've got radical candor, we've got kind of the safe place, so they know that they can call me out, and they'll raise their hand and they'll go, you started it with the predicate of the sentence and we have no idea who you're talking about. Can you go back to the beginning? So, I think, for some of us, we have that end in mind, and we're driving. That's why I mentioned the storytelling. It's as much for you and your mindset as much as it is for making sure that your team is involved. It is something that I try to be very cognizant of, but I just get really hyped up about change. And I have to remember that living in the future is great because it gives me motivation, but not everybody is there. But I need to take a step back and manage the now. And it's a daily battle for me sometimes.
I think just sort of connecting with that too, one of the things that I try to remind myself is that everything is fluid. So even though I think I might be able to see the future and see the future impact, I can't really see into the future. So it's sort of really kind of like reminding myself that even though I think I know where things are going, plenty of things going to happen in between that might shift that. So I try to just stay really present and conscious in what's unfolding right now between the time that we started to want to change to where we're going to go to see what needs to change and pivot. So whenever I get all excited about, but can't you see what's going to happen down the road if we don't do this, if we don't do that? I remind myself that really all we have are reasonably good informed guesses about what's going to happen down the road, because one thing the last few years has shown me, I don't know about the rest of you, but I really can predict half of what has gone on over the last 4 years or so.
To bring both of those things somewhat together, so, Trent had kind of mentioned getting that feedback on how you're coming across and the communication. I think just keeping a pulse on how everyone is doing with the change. I get that. I get super excited about the vision. We talk in change management about pointing to the destination. In my brain, I'm already at the destination and I have to kind of reel myself back a little bit. So keeping a pulse on how everyone is doing, how is everyone feeling, and not forgetting, to April's point about living in the present. So often, because we haven't got all the way there, we forget to celebrate the wins along the way, right? So making sure, that can really help you stay in the now, is if you're thinking back, the end of each week, asking, what were our wins this week? Even little things, right, to keep the team motivated, I think are so important, because it's just so easy to forget about the wins along the way.
Alex, it's such a good point. Just to build on that, I think that the challenge and sometimes the reminder I also need is putting in some discipline and structure to the process of managing that change. If you're charged with that future vision, we all know this is our business. Change management is a discipline. It requires, just like projecting a fiscal budget, it requires planning, steps, touch base, the pieces of change management that feel more like project management are just as important as establishing that future vision to kind of connect the today and the tomorrow.
Yeah, I think one of the ways I think about it is I'm not managing my mindset, I'm managing my priorities, and I'm doing my best to kind of align both short-term priorities with the long-term vision. So, that brings in communication, but it also brings in alignment between the work you're doing now and what it's leading to. So it helps me kind of keep track of that. If I don't focus on my mindset, I focus on priorities, and I look at that on a regular basis.
So since we have moved a bit to the individual leader concern, and we'll meet to organizations and role models in a moment, what could in the anxiety, in the overwhelm, in the eagerness, deadlines, and all of that to achieve and make that success a change, what happens is sometimes leaders lead a very lonely journey, and they don't want to tell people, I don't know how to figure this out, I don't know. And that possibly creates a lot of stress, anxiety, and uncertainty for the leader. And most human beings are not very comfortable being in the unknown. And we don't want to look completely unknown in front of others, especially when we are in a role where people are looking upon us to lead the change and to make sense of it. So the question I have is, what are, in your own experiences, what has worked well for you? And Christina did touch a bit on that, on priorities. What else could be the measures that we as leaders can look after ourselves when we are leading and inspiring the change?
So I'll start with, it's interesting, as you were explaining all that, before you got to the specific question, I just want to kind of bring up, the leader's anxiousness, right? The leader's uncertainty, going through everything. In my last internal position, I led global DEI. And, a lot of leaders really just didn't know how to navigate the conversation. And I think a big aha moment for them was the employees aren't looking at you to have the answers. They're looking at you to listen, right? They're looking at you to participate. They're looking at you to show compassion and show that you care. And it's okay to not have the answers. I think, leaders jump to, I'm going to lose respect. I'm going to, they get anxious about oh, I need to be, steps ahead. It's okay to say, you know what, I'm not sure, or I need to look into that. I'm going to get back to you. And just having that vulnerability, I think, is really important. So when I think about kind of managing your own itself, of course, there's things like mindfulness and really just making sure you're in a good place to be able to lead others. But it's also just reminding yourself you don't have to have all the answers.
I think there are two kind of unrelated points that jumped to mind for me on this in terms of managing your own mindset through change. One is sort of how do you control the controllables? So putting in moments to stop and assess, if we were to look back and this fails, why? And then planning around kind of a pre-mortem instead of the post-mortem. Sometimes that can not only alleviate some of the anxieties and create a space for people to raise what could go wrong, but it also helps you course correct for it. So I think that's helpful. And the second, and completely unrelated, maybe more practical action for me has been, you may not have the ability internally to speak about those worries or anxieties or insecurities, but ensuring that you've identified sort of your own personal board of directors or confidants that you can speak to. Colleagues like these folks on the panel would be great examples, so that you can check your own mindset and have those moments, those moments of discussion without really impacting maybe your credibility or confidence of the change you're leading.
And yeah, to build on that, a lot of times when change has to be rolled out, typically we start off with what has gone wrong. What do we need to correct? Instead of starting with, hey, we have done something. What have we done well? May not be all, but recognizing what we have done well and amplifying that to what are we missing? What are the gaps? And where do I need to use my experience or our experience and amplify that? I'm just going to take some questions. I think Trent has already answered one question. Another question from Tim Boer. Managing change effectively is indeed an art, and it requires a well thought out strategy, including the establishment of proper structures and processes. Would you please speak to this?
I think well thought out is the word that kind of tripped me up, because you have a project plan, but it's kind of like I think it was Mike Tyson that said everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face. And that's how I feel about just about any change that I've led. It's like, oh, this is going to be great. Everyone's going to get on board. We get halfway through and I'm sucker punched. So I think that it is an art. And I think one of the panelists has already said, I think it was April that said, you have to be fluid. You kind of have to go with the punches sometimes, so to speak. I think that, having a blueprint of where you want to go and the milestones that you want to accomplish are great, and they're needed because everyone needs a destination, but you also need to be able to have a little bit of agility and flexibility. We use the Agile method. I've written about it in Sprint Recruiting. I love it because it's very quick. So you get that immediate gratification. But there are so many different communication touch points, the daily stand-up, the retroactive, where everyone comes together. And I think, Lolita, to your point, is what's working so we can scale it and what's not so we can overcome it. And having those frequent conversations not just keeps your project along, but as a leader, I have found that whenever I start, kind of having those, there are different team members that I realize they're struggling with the same problem. So it allows me in my one-on-one with them to go a little bit deeper and to help them on that career path and that career progression, while also simultaneously helping me keep that change management or that project on track.
I would just add to that. So I'm also one of the volunteer orgs I'm in is I'm vice president of the Association of Change Management Professionals Midwest. I'm change management certified. You do not need to be change management certified to understand the frameworks and know how to use it. But if you're just thinking of resources, so, echoing everything Trent said as far as kind of all of the soft pieces of it, but if you're looking for real, kind of step by step, check out ACMP Global, the standard. You don't have to join, you don't have to pay for a membership. There's a ton of resources there. ProSci is also another really great resource. They have their own framework. There's also an excellent book called Switch by the Heath brothers. It gives a lot of I see Trent. Yep, I'm all about it. That's where I talk about find the bright spots, points of destination, all of those things. Definitely recommend
immediately
that.
the elephant came to mind as soon as you said that. The elephant rider and the elephant just was the first thing. Love it.
So as
Fantastic
you can see,
book.
it's a super helpful book. But there are a ton of resources out there, and we'd be happy to talk through with anyone, understanding a little bit more about the change management profession.
And since we're recommending books, I'm going to add just one. There's one by Tracy Lovejoy and Shannon. I never remember Shannon's last name. They're going to kill me. It's called Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout. And it is like a textbook for those of us that like change, that are kind of drawn to it. It goes through some of the psychological things that we go through from the burnout. How do you recover from that burnout so that way you're still leading your team? And it's like fact-based but story-based and all of that. So that's another good one.
As we are talking about, sorry, please.
I was going to just make one kind of final tactical comment, which I think is left out a lot. And it doesn't matter what approach or process you use. It's just the idea of metrics and defining initially with the people that you're working for, what like business outcomes and business impact measures you're trying to accomplish, and then checking in on those throughout the whole process. It really helps you kind of see where people might be struggling and pinpoint and adjust your tactics, because just like what everyone just said, there is a structure to it, and then there's an adjustment piece to it. And I find that the more work you do up front on your measures and the more time you take to kind of pay attention to those throughout the process, then the more agile and effective you can be. And so thanks for letting me throw that out. Yep.
And just one quick thing to connect with everyone was saying as well, spending that time on some upfront assessment in order to be able to plan your approach is very important as well. And then connecting with some of the other things that I've heard, I tend to think about it as making plans from which I will deviate. So that I, not necessarily married to any change management plan or project plan I have in place. It's a starting point, and I know that somewhere along the line, I'm going to have to deviate. It has done a lot for my own mindset and how I'm thinking or how I'm viewing things, even if I'm having to shift things along the way. Thank you for letting me add that.
Thank you. There's another question that's come up. I don't know who the person is, but I'm going to hold on to that question. I have another question related to that. Now, we have all seen change in many organizations. We have either been part of it or we have been as an external, we have seen it, we have experienced it ourselves. What could be some of the inspiring examples in your experience of change leadership? Something that's done well, we can get inspired and maybe apply that to even in the current environment with a slight flex or shift. But what could be some of those examples?
I'm happy to jump in with a quick but impactful one to get us started. In my previous organization was a place called Right to Play International, an international development firm. And when the pandemic hit, it turned every facet of the organization on its head. It was an organization that did in-person engagement with children and youth around the world, relied on in-person fundraisers, door-to-door. Everything we did was direct. So at the time, I was Chief People Officer, and our CEO used it as an opportunity to accelerate change that was needed for the organization to evolve, regardless of whether or not the pandemic had happened. But the brilliance of the way he communicated that change wasn't from a place of fear. Everyone was already really scared, and the uncertainty of what was happening around the world, different access to information, he communicated as an opportunity. And in some ways, a gift for us to accelerate our own processes, our own ability to innovate, and to really advance the organization. So for me, the secret sauce was it would have been very easy to communicate that need for change as a save the organization. How do we ensure we're all employed and we keep doing great work? but instead turning it on its head to say, we all have a role to play. Let's all hands on deck. Let's reinvent our organization. And went from reaching 3 million children a year to 12 million children a year, had our most successful year in COVID. So was proud to be part of that journey. And I took lots of notes and learned lots at being part of the executive team.
Yeah, and Nikki and I think Alex kind of referred to this previously. To me, it's the inspiring change leaders are the ones that take the change journey with you, and they don't stand outside of it and watch it and complain about it and monitor it and et cetera. They're there, they're in it. They dive in, they try the things, they model it, they get dirty, they fail, they share their successes, they share their struggles. So, and I think that was a great kind of story, Nikki, that kind of demonstrated that. And so that can look in lots of different ways, but it's the difference between somebody being present and participating in the change versus standing on the outside, trying to control it. That's what I would say.
And I think kind of going on with what Nikki said is it does start with the leader. You know, her said, okay, let's change our mindset and see this as an opportunity. The one that I worked for, we had done an organizational change, which I kind of helped lead. And I think 2 months whenever we were done, it was an 18-month project, huge. 2 months later, she pulls all the leadership in and says, hey, our home office, which was in Madrid, says that we're going to go through another organizational change. And just immediately was like, good God, you know, we're going to have these people like in a change hangover. And so I was really battling, like, do I really want to do this? Do I want to do it to the people that I just said, hey, I just got you to change and we're going to change it again? And the second day she comes in and she says, I went to the meeting in Spain thinking that we were going to be talking about a new project, blah, blah, blah. Never thought that we'd be leading another change, because I remember getting off the plane here in the States and I get off and I go, another change. How am I going to tell my leaders? How am I going to be the face of this? And she says, I just want to encourage you that if you don't have another change in you, I understand, I can empathize. But if you're going to stay, I need you to be a hell yes. And if you're a hell no, I don't have it in me, that's okay too. Let's talk about a plan. So that way everyone lands safely. And it was just that vulnerability, but also that, I always called it the mama hand that she had. It was that real balance that made me go inward and say, okay, you know what? I've got another fight left in me. And I believe in what we're doing. I just had to get over that hump. So I think leaders being vulnerable and sharing their frustration or their angst or their fear, I think that is probably one of the biggest change agents.
There's another question that's come up, which is, again, very crucial. Cultural variations, and I'm just going to read out the question. Read out what the person has written. Cultural variations play a crucial role in how we approach change leadership. Yet, it is often dismissed or its effects understated. The question is, how do you bring people to a head and heart space where they are willing to embrace change without undermining their sensitivities or appearing patronizing?
Yeah, there's many different layers to this question. I'll tackle a portion, and I'm sure the rest of the panelists will all have incredible things to add. So in change management, we talk about kind of 80-20 rule. There's 20% of people that, they're either going to 100% love the change from the start or 100% hate the change from the start. You're really not going to change their mind. You really want to focus on the neutral, okay? Like those are the people that are like, a little bit hesitant, right? So that's one piece of it. Because I think we get so focused on the people that we need to change the most, that we forget about all the people, the many people in the middle, whose hearts and minds we need to capture as well. So I think that's one piece of it. Now, when it comes to cultural variations, it's interesting because the course I'm teaching right now is around kind of understanding different cultures and business. Yes, there are, certain cultures, right? When we talk about different countries that may be generally more resistant to change, generally, more embracing of change. But at the end of the day, everyone's an individual. And, just because they come from a certain culture doesn't necessarily reflect exactly how they're going to respond to something. So it's so important that each of your leaders, and this is where you need to get middle management on board, each of your leaders can make sure that they feel comfortable, that they're getting what they need, the information they need to feel, like they can embrace this change. And, when we talk about change leadership, yes, we have an overall organizational strategy, but you are going to need to tweak depending on how big your organization is, how many countries you're in. You are going to have, different aspects of the plan for different areas. Even, forget even different countries, just different departments have their own culture, right? How you approach sales is going to be different than how you approach delivery, whatever, departments you have in your organization. So I think, kind of as much as you can personalize while being scalable, treat people as individuals as much as you can while kind of understanding the overall picture, as well as don't dwell on the people who just don't want to change their minds no matter what.
I think connecting to that, Alex, because you said something that I felt was very important. You were talking about making sure that each one of the leaders have what they need, in order to be able to go through the change. But then also I'm thinking, also I've been referring to be able to support the people that are reporting directly up to them to sort of be able to kind of move through the change. So that connection, how well they know the individual teammates, that they work with, will help them be able to support individuals through their own personal individual transitions. And so that role of the middle manager, as you were talking about, of that leader, is very important. They're actually are going to be the ones that are able to support people through their individual transitions, make the connections, understand where any resistance might be coming from, understand some of the history and the background of the people that they're working with, so they'll be able to move more people successfully through to sort of the other end of the change. So the more that we can ensure that they're equipped with sort of the understanding and the tools and the ability to do that around fostering trust, building connections, in an everyday interaction with the direct reports, but also around what transition is and how to interact with people and help them move themselves through a transition. I think that's also kind of going to be a big part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think what's already been mentioned there are some good points around culture, and obviously there's some differences, like Alex mentioned, around where people are in the world and the different cultures that are associated with different places that you live. And ultimately, there's also the culture that you create as the leader. I think you reward, you recognize the people that you select to be a part of your team that is going after the change. All these different things that you as a leader have control over ultimately create the culture of the organization. And so, it goes back to yourself and your self-awareness. And ultimately, you have to be bought into the change as well. One of the biggest things that I see get in the way of successful changes is when the whole leadership cadre that's tasked with leading it actually isn't bought into it themselves. So it starts with you. You need to recognize and deal with whatever you're resisting as a leader, and then ultimately create that culture by the way you lead.
Talking about culture, another question that comes to my mind is, what in your experience is one of the most often forgotten on the people side of change?
Diversity.
Can you say
You
more
have to
about
have
that?
the right, yeah, you've got to have the right people around the table, from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all ethnicities, because if you really want the change to stick and to be successful, then you need to make sure that you're looking at it from every possible view as possible. I worked for an organization that was not known for its diversity, and I always tell people it was 1 year of my life that was penance for some ungodly sin that I hope I enjoyed, because I didn't realize how much I yearned and had become accustomed to diversity until I wasn't in it. So we were trying to lead a change, and it was all like, this is how it has to be. And we didn't have enough diversity around the table to really kind of push back. And so there were 3 or 4 initiatives that just completely fell flat. And that was a lot of wasted productivity, energy, time from all the resources that were involved. So I really think that, that's why diversity is not just a touchy-feely thing. It is an absolute business imperative and the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's people things like Trent is talking about, and then, one of the things that is kind of on the outside of that concept, but I think really is important to remember is that when people aren't doing the behavior that you would like them to do, it's usually because something's in their way. And often that is the system or processes or policies or perceptions of how they should behave. I find that if you're hearing resistance or you're lacking some movement in adoption, that I don't think people are fundamentally trying to be a big pain. They literally just they're stuck for some reason. They need some help, and just remember that there's systems that are in place that actually make it very hard for people to change. And our job as leader is to help get rid of those roadblocks and make it easy for people to change.
Just to piggyback, Christine, on your insights, I think in my own personal experience, the times that I've stumbled with change as a leader, I've failed to slow down and engage the folks that all need to be engaged, from the most important frontline staff to gain their insights so they feel safe to speak up and participate in the change, to share what might work, share ideas, share concerns. Thinking you have all the answers as a leader and feeling like maybe you need to have all those answers is usually a recipe for disaster.
I would just add, the question was around what do people forget, right? And I think even before kind of the change project kicks off, it's when they're designing the change, does this align with our culture, with our values? If it doesn't, and actually we're trying to evolve our culture and our values, well, it's a bit a cart before the horse, right? You can't like jump into the change expecting that everyone's going to be on board when they joined a company for whatever values or culture you had before. So cultures can't stay static. Of course, they need to evolve, but that needs to be something that's constantly addressed and understood, and translate it to the values, because sometimes maybe it does align, but people just don't see it. So make sure that you're constantly connecting the dots for folks.
And that actually answers a lot of. There were like 3 or 4 questions that were in there about how do you do this with this, and for those of you that asked, I think the last 3 questions, Alex just kind of summed it up in a nice little bow.
April, you had something to say?
Oh, yes. I mean, I was also thinking to add some of the things that I've seen forgotten, that I've forgotten myself at times, is that everyone's going through transition at a different rate, at a different time, and at a different pace. So you're expecting people to be in one place, because that's where you are, or we all know sometimes change gets sort of like cascaded. So senior executives find out first, then high-level managers, then middle managers, and then maybe others that are impacted by the change, and sort of forgetting that when people found out about it, how it individually affects kind of like their own kind of like working dynamic, and the fact that people just transition through things differently. I feel like for some of the things that are forgotten, it can lead to frustration for leaders. Why aren't people with me? Or why is this person still thinking this way? It must be an issue with that individual, as opposed to sort of like the rest of the group. So just remembering that people transition in different ways, different pace, and sometimes when they found out about the change, affects that as well.
And you bring a great point, April, because change is happening in some way or the other every single moment, every single day, and not every change creates a transition. Transition is a psychological impact that it has, and people like Herminia Ibarra, people like William Bridges have touched a lot on this topic. And it's unfair to summarize it in 3 words, but given that we are running in a limited time, essentially transition involves, there is an ending, there is an in-between process or in-between period, and then there's a beginning. I think most of the change management, and as much as we need to, as a leader, talk about benefits and talk about how good it is for the organization, the team, the people, and so on and so forth, many leaders make the mistake of not looking at the pain points. And as one of our audience spoke about, Priya has spoken about, along with communication, transparency and fairness is important. Absolutely. So people don't talk about the pain points. People don't think about there is an ending and our identity and our thoughts are still with the ending. We haven't quite come over to the beginning. What has been your experience with it in terms of addressing this part?
I am a huge proponent of bridges. And so utilize that transition model in a variety of different ways. And typically when working with leaders to help them fulfill their role in change, take them through the understanding of transition process and think about some of the things that have been suggested for helping people through endings, managing sort of like the neutral zone, as Bridges called it, and the fact that people might enter the new beginning, and if there is any additional change or any switch during that period of time, they may end up back sort of like in that middle period. So I think sort of utilizing that information, sharing it with others, remembering myself, and then making specific plans for how I will attempt, or people can attempt to move people through those transition phases, how to recognize them, and some of the things that are helpful are typically kind of like how I've focused on it. I'm like a huge Bridges fan. Anybody wants to talk Bridges, that knows Bridges, that doesn't, I'm more than happy to do that. I'm always looking for someone to have that transition model conversation with. So.
And I'll join you in that conversation, April. Thank you. Sorry. Who else would like to give their perspective?
I think for me, there's a question that I always default to in trying to understand those pain points and what will it take to go from here to there. And it's reframing it to say, what would have to be true in order for this to change, in order for you to buy in order for us to believe the business could evolve or transform. So really anchoring on that concept of what would have to be true. That also can help you identify, to Alex's earlier point, the folks that are just never going to get there. Sometimes the answer is nothing. Nothing you could say or do could change my mind. And those aren't the folks to spend your time and energy on, but equally important to identify who they are.
It's kind of like sitting at the family table and, you know, the topic of politics come up. There are certain family members that as soon as they start talking, I just go to my happy place because they don't want a dialogue. They want to pontificate. You know, if you want a dialogue, I'm all in. You know, we don't have to agree. We can agree to disagree, but let's have that dialogue, because during that, I'm going to learn a little bit more about you and what makes you tick. And that's just going to make our relationship even better. But I do want to discourage, because I think I did a lot of this in my early career, is those are naysayers. They don't like change. Just, you know, kind of swipe them to the side, and I would go and hang out with the cheerleading side that made me feel good. But I was missing critical information from those people who saw something that I didn't. So I think that, you know, to Nikki's point, identify those that are just going to gripe and complain regardless. I mean, you could be giving them a brand new car and paying off their house. They're going to find something wrong with it. Leave them alone. But the others, make sure that you listen, document it, and active listen. Don't listen to change their mind. Listen to what they're actually saying and then dig in on it. Force yourself to ask those 5 whys. So why do you feel that way? Okay, well, you know, why do you think this is not a good idea? And by the time you get to the root, 95% of the time, they are seeing something that I did not see, and it saved the change management that I was trying to put into place.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would say I absolutely saw this, as you might imagine, when leading DEI, right? There were quite a few people that, you know, I was trying to, like, you know, get out of my own biases, but I even was like, oh gosh, I'm never going to get through to them. And it really was just having conversations, just understanding where they were coming from. You would be surprised at, how people can change your mind. So, when I talk about scalable solutions, right? Yeah, you don't want to spend, X amount of energy hours on the project on, the huge amount of resistance. But when we're talking about especially culture change, having those focus groups, doing that qualitative analysis to understand where people are coming from. Again, it's not so much that they want you to do everything they say that, they think you should do, or, that they don't agree with. They want to feel heard. And the more you can just make them feel heard and feel validated, I think validation is an incredible skill that a leader can have. Validation doesn't mean agreement. It just means that, hey, your feelings are valid. I understand where you are coming from. I understand what your point is. And that's, that perspective taking, right? So, we talk about empathy. I like to really coach around perspective taking. Empathy can be very hard, especially if you have a very different background experience than the other person you're talking about. You can get to a place of connection, great. But if you can at least take their perspective, right? And especially for those leaders who it's like empathy feels a little too warm and fuzzy for them, right? Like if you can get them to understand the perspective and take a step back and relate it to something that resonates with them, you can get really far.
And if I could just jump on, because I think, you're talking to what, how many of it? 6 of us are practitioners. We live, we breathe this. But let's not discount that we've got probably, I would say 70% of your normal HR people that don't think that way. And it starts with, I've got to kind of manage this and I've got to be the buffer and all that. It's shifting your mindset as an HR professional to understand that you are a business consultant who owns the largest expense and revenue producing asset in the company. And if you reframe your mindset that way, then the stuff that, Alex and April and all, it comes natural because it reframed, like, I've got to get these people involved. I've got to hear what they're saying. I've got to motivate them and develop them because the company's profits and viability depend on it.
Yeah, I was gonna, kind of bring us full circle maybe back to the topic of this session, which is around leading and inspiring. And ultimately, if you find yourself managing a change or reacting to a change, that is like a exponentially much harder job. And some of the things that folks have been mentioning right now, it's this idea of bringing people along with you and going ahead and getting out in front of it and sharing even ideas that you're having around something that might change. I know I've seen HR organizations that just even put out little feelers around a particular thing they're considering before they've made that decision. And anything you can do to make people feel like they actually are valued, whether that's during the process or even before, is just so critical, because that's all people want. They want to feel heard, they want to feel valued, and giving them that opportunity actually makes your job easier.
Absolutely. And in fact, Trent, you mentioned some time back about diversity of perspectives, diversity of the people you have in your organization. And of course, with diversity, one needs to have inclusion as well. And it reminds me of a book by Nancy Klein. The book name is Think. And towards the latter end of the book, she mentions about this manager from Staples who has a meeting with every direct report and their direct reports, and she just listens. She listens, she considers the perspective, what you mentioned, Alex, and she comes back saying, okay, I hear you. This is something we will think about. And she comes back and says, sorry, we can't do this because of whatever reason. So the way I sense made out of it was she's listening in, she's including, she's taking perspectives, and also letting people know that, hang on, I would love to take everyone's perspectives, but because of this, at this point in time, I can't. And I think that gives the transparency and feels fair too. So given that, what is one thing about, I know we spoke a little bit about culture before, and I come from Asia, and I've seen, I live in Asia and I'm an Asian, and I very much appreciate vulnerability. Vulnerability, I think, is great. I mean, even as a coach and facilitator, I have connected when I've been vulnerable. Yet vulnerability is a two-edged sword, because in some cultures, especially in Asia, that's not the first place to go to. It's all about saving face. It's all about looking good, the status, hierarchy, and all of that. In where you are, have you seen such experiences? And how can a leader remember that, take into account that their own culture as well as the culture of the people that the firm has, in case it's diverse, especially on things like vulnerability, things like speaking up. A lot of Asians don't speak up. And it's misunderstood very often, thinking they are in line with the change. Probably not. Any perspectives on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm teaching my students this semester. Those are the exact things that we're talking about. So, you know, I think one way to approach that is to make sure that you have different forums to provide feedback. So I remember at my last company, I was really excited to get all of our employees in the Philippines together, you know, just open forum, kind of office hours. I get on, you know, and I have a vice president title. And in my head, my American mindset, I'm not thinking through that they see the title, they're not going to speak up. They're not going to ask questions of me, right? Even if they have really great feedback and points. So we started having, you know, like just throwing out anonymous surveys. You know, you could disclose your name if you wanted to, but just throwing out different methods to capture feedback. But then you have other countries, even within the same continent. So for instance, our employees in India could be quite direct, right? And a few had no problem providing feedback. So, you know, also just understanding all facets of the culture and what might be influencing whether they speak up. There could be gender dynamics, right? There could be, you know, it's not just about the title. There could be gender, there could be, you know, caste, there could be so many different things that are influencing. But the more avenues you provide for providing feedback to you, so that way you can get the feedback you need to make the change better, to make your leadership better, that's what's really going to do it. Because we have introverts, extroverts. You're never going to have one forum that's going to do it for everybody.
Yeah, leading in Latin America, this is the second time that I've done it. You know, in the U.S., it's, hey, here's an issue. Let's talk about it. Everyone, you know, shoot holes in it. Let's have that healthy conflict. And then when we walk out the door, we have a consensus and we're moving forward. Latin America doesn't really work like that. It's, yes, sir, that sounds great. And then they go and they have all these little separate meetings, and then they select someone to come and talk to me and go, we have some issues about this, you know, and I have to remind myself of going, okay, this is a cultural thing. But like internally, I want to go, we literally just spent an hour on the phone talking, and I asked you, you know, and I'm trying to be open. So for me, I have to remember it's a cultural thing. It's not necessarily a me communicating thing, because I really try to be cognizant to make sure that I'm communicating effectively. But that's one of the things that I've learned is, like, rather than going through the entire process, I go, here's a change that I'd like to do. And it's like 4 or 5 sentences, and then I move on to the next thing, because I know that they're all going to go and talk. And then I bring them together and say, okay, according to your spokesperson, here are some things that were brought up. Let's talk about it now. So I've had to learn that the hard way. It took me about 2 or 3 years, but now that's my MO for going after that.
Yeah, the on a related note, I think for me, one of the big learnings is around being explicit, both about your leadership style, your culture, its influence. As someone who lives in Toronto, one of the most multicultural cities in the world, used to work at a global organization. We had staff in 22 countries, providing that safety and space to be explicit about, hey, this is the way I lead as an executive, and I want to engage with you, and I'm creating that norm. They may go there, they may not go there, but then it helps me understand, because they can share their norms in an explicit way to help me be effective in engaging change, centralizing, decentralizing, formal, informal, to really adjust. And I think the biggest challenge is be flexible as a leader. There is no such thing as a leadership style anymore. You have to be fluid.
We have 4 minutes left. We could go on for another hour or so easily. We have a time cutoff. any key takeaways or any key learnings that you want to share in one sentence for our audience? Each of you, one sentence, and then we can conclude.
I'll go last.
Okay.
Why don't we do it in order of first name? Make it easy.
Okay, so Alex,
There you
go
go,
first.
Alex.
I knew that was coming. You know, when we talk about the art of change leadership, I automatically go to the art and science of data, right? So, you know, just remembering that there are objective pieces and subjective pieces, and all of them are important. Neither is less valid than the other. So just always making sure that you are balancing people, tasks, and with that, you know, all of the feelings and concerns that come with it in a way that, you know, you can manage, right? That you can still show up and be the leader you need to be.
Thank you. April.
I would say always start with making sure that you meet people exactly where they are. I think a lot of what we talked about really came down to that, whether it was cultural differences or individual transitions or whatever it is. Have a real understanding of where people are by finding out ways to find that out, direct connection, or those that may give you some kind of a clue, and start there with whatever it is that you're proposing, to bring people along and to try not to get ahead of them or be behind them.
Nikki.
For me, it's probably that all leadership is change leadership in this day and age. So don't put it in a box. Be mindful of all of these practices all the time.
Christine.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something similar. Ultimately, I think change and knowing how to lead change is a differentiator, both for individuals, whether you're leading people or leading projects or leading yourself, and organizations. It's to the point where you can't afford to not try to get better at this. So I would just encourage you to look at some of the books that people have provided today and figure out some things that you want to get better at and go for it, because it's only going to help you in the future and make you better. So.
And Trent.
All right, well, I'm going to stay in character because every time I'm on one of these, I always somehow quote like a superhero or a comic book or something. I don't know. It started 3 times, so I came a little bit prepared today. One of my favorite quotes about this topic is from Iron Man. He says that heroes are made by the path that they choose, not by the powers that they're graced with.
Thank you all. We are right at time. And thank you, audience, for being very engaging. And thank you to each of the panelists. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.